Hey everybody, welcome to the Founders Mentality. This is episode 18. I am joined by a guest that I think is going to bring any of the CEOs that listen to this podcast or any of the founders out there a tremendous amount of value. This is somebody that I originally met about a year, maybe a little more than a year ago, at an event. We've stayed in contact. I've seen her speak live as well, and now we're neighbors. Now she's right down the hall at WeWork here, and so I thought, you know what, it's time to have this person on the show. Let's do it. So I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to turn the mic over, and we're going to let this guest introduce herself. So welcome to the show. What is your name, and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Meredith Neumann,
Yep.
and my business is called Scaling Within.
Yep.
And what that is it's kind of a place for founders, CEOs, to be able to work through their issues. So my background is as a licensed therapist, and I was in that field for about 10 years before I closed down my private practice and shifted gears to bring it into the marketplace. And kind of my interest behind that was seeing that whether it's the head of a family or a business, any kind of system like that, the issues at the top always flow down. So if you can have healthy, whole people at the top, then that flows into healthy cultures that impacts culture beyond that. And so my interest has really been in kind of the pioneer, visionary founders that have a big heart to bring change in some sort of area, but need a space where they can work through and process through issues. So Scaling Within is also about expanding your internal capacity to sustain growth.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Love it. And if anybody listening has not heard Meredith speak live, I highly recommend it. I took a ton of value out of the it was a mini Eno or mini bar thing at Best Buy. It was great. It was great. So thank you for your time in that. And I see that you speak a lot in front of groups. So it's awesome. I want to dive into some of the nitty gritty of this, but let's start, since this is the Founders Mentality and you are a founder, let's start a little bit back with really where this came from. So you kind of gave a very high level of this, but you said you shut down your practice. What was your practice before you started Scaling Within? Who were you counseling or speaking with at that point? Not specific names, obviously, but the type of individuals that you were speaking with at that point.
Sure. Yeah. So my specialty was in complex trauma and PTSD. Okay. So it was a therapy practice and people coming out of all sorts of abuse and manipulation. So that could be relationships with narcissists, con artists, people coming out of even spiritual abuse and manipulation, cult stuff at points, but just a range of trauma.
Okay. Wow. And that somehow translated into working with founders and CEOs? How?
Well, I think if you are a founder, you definitely experience a lot of trauma.
Okay. Yeah, I'm saying it facetiously. Yeah.
No.
Yes,
you tell me.
Yeah. No. We're not going to do a therapy session live. That would be absolutely horrible, right? We don't need to do that today. But I mean, I can see the parallels, right?
Yeah.
But so when did you draw these parallels? Where did you start seeing this trend and make the decision that that's more who you wanted to help and who you wanted to speak with?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it actually unfolded over time. I had an internal sense before it really clicked for me. And I'll say this, basically when I first went to grad school, I knew that I wanted to help people. Like I had a heart to help people remove barriers that get in their way so they could fully be what's inside of them to be. Yeah. But you can have that heart to help people but have no idea what to do. Like what do you do if someone has anxiety or is suicidal or these different things? So I knew that I wanted to get the skill and training. Okay. And it's a massively long, intensive process to get licensed as a therapist. Yeah. So within that, I knew that, but I always had this internal sense that it would be a foundation for something else. And I didn't know what that meant, but it was kind of this intuitive sense that what I would end up doing, there wasn't a precedent for. Okay. So that was kind of that. And I think although I loved working with the complex trauma and PTSD, and it was a very, very useful for understanding the depth of kind of people's issues, it was also, it's very exhausting and draining. But in that, kind of how I see the difference between what I'm doing now, even though I love that work, it was often me putting in a lot and helping people go a little bit of way.
Okay.
And what's different about this is working with a lot of people who are these high-performing achievers, and you give them just a little bit, and they take it very far. And then everyone that they impact, it kind of cascades down. So
Right.
in a sense, it was a way to scale my efforts, to take something that I could do 6 months of therapeutic with one person and kind of work one-on-one with a leader, where then the impact of that is very far-reaching.
I love that answer. I was thinking about this, and you know, I guess there's a couple of things that are really interesting to me.
Yeah.
With founders, we're used to having advisors. We're used to having maybe investors that give us our list of to-dos, right?
Yep.
It's no different than a honey-do list at home, right? But these are the list of things that you need to accomplish. And I think as founders, we just know that we're supposed to turn around and make those things happen, right?
Yeah.
I think the thing that's really cool, though, about that is if you're working with an individual that
Yep.
is maybe working through some challenges in their personal life.
Yeah.
Many times when you're working with them, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess the assumption I would make is that the sphere of influence that has is much smaller than if you're working with a founder. And that's a generality, a general statement maybe I shouldn't even make, but you know, if I were to take advice that you give me that I can immediately apply to my business, that's going to immediately affect my entire business. All the employees that I have, all the investors that are in this business, and it's going to spill over into my personal life because it's going to help my family. It's going to help my friends' relationships. It's a huge change agent in this space. And I'm sure individuals still have, they have their group of friends, they have their family,
Yep.
They have a lot of people pulling for them too. So it's not that it's just the individual that you're helping in that case,
Yeah.
but it's pretty amazing the effect, the change that you can affect with all these conversations, right?
Exactly.
And I love the immediacy.
Yes. And kind of, so this is kind of my personal language for this, but
Yeah.
I kind of think of part of what's in my DNA to do is bring counsel to kings.
Yeah.
And so like modern day people of influence, and whoever whatever they do has massive impact. So the other thing is when you are a king in an industry or you're pioneering something new, whether it's well-founded, you're at the beginning of stages,
Yep.
what I hear the most is how lonely it is at the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common kind of understanding for founders.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I picture part of even the language of scaling within, it's also kind of like scaling a mountain of influence.
Yeah.
So the further up you go, the thinner the airspace is, and the less people make that trek.
Yeah.
But also the influence at the top of that peak spreads far beyond yourself.
Right.
And so a lot of times some of the pain that you're going through, or when you're the tip of the spear going through you just have to break through in these areas, it's extremely painful, but the impact is massive. And so a lot of times what I work with people on is some of the things that you're overcoming, it's not just what you're personally overcoming, it's for those that are coming behind you in the area that you're spearheading.
Right. Love that. Love
Yeah.
that. Okay, so for anybody listening, like I said, I think that hopefully you're going to find tremendous value in this, because every time I speak to you or hear you speak, I pull something out of it. One of the big ones that really hit me was the first time I heard you speak in front of a room, and you were talking about finding your window. And I can put a graphic up on the final video of this if
Sure.
you want to help kind of explain this, but I wanted you to talk about this a little bit, because at least for me, this had a really immediate impact on my
Yeah.
life. I had a immediate conversation with my wife when I got home about this.
Yep.
And explained to her what finding my window means and why this is important and how she needs to allow me the time to find this window and why am I out of the window? Why did I just fall out the window? All these things. But
Yeah.
I really loved that message, and I wanted you to kind of speak about that message
Sure.
a little bit for my audience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll do my best to do a little version. This
Yes.
is kind of the thing, it takes a while to unpack.
Yeah.
And I just thought of this. I am speaking at Startup Week coming up, and
There
so
you go.
I will be
So
October
Startup Week
10th.
is
October 10th at
Great.
10 a.m. here.
Right here at the WeWork,
Right here.
Nordic in North
Yes.
Loop, 10 a.m. Awesome. All right.
Yep.
So people can learn more about that, but give us the Cliffs Notes of
Yes,
this.
I'll give you the cliff notes. So this is something that's called the window of tolerance. I didn't come up with this,
Yeah.
but this is something that I discovered in my work with complex trauma and PTSD. It's this theory that comes from neurobiology that's used in that field, but it's helpful for every single person. And that's why I love teaching it, because to me, the foundation of scaling within is self-awareness. If you don't have awareness about what's happening on the inside of you, you can't do anything different. You'll always react out of old patterns. But how do you actually grow in self-awareness? So this to me is a framework that's very simple, that it gives just a beginning starting point. And I love how holistic it is. Like, it not only helps at work, but it helps in everyone's marriages and outside relationships.
Yes.
So we'll see, maybe a graphic will come up, but basically, if you picture two lines, so I think people can see me, but there's this top line, there's this bottom line, and when you're between those lines, you're in your window. So everyone has a window, but you can't see it. Basically, when you're in your window, you're connected to the wisest, kindest part of who you are, or you're able to see from the forest from the trees. You're emotionally aware, but you're connected to logic and reason. So often I'll have people even think of, what's a time in your life when you felt most fully alive or fully yourself? So for a lot of people, it's a time in nature or on a vacation, or maybe when they're in their element in their work. But most likely, it's like you're very present in the moment. And really, you're connected to your prefrontal cortex. So that's a part of your brain that's not fully developed till around 26, which I think is fascinating, how many of us make major life decisions before that.
Yeah, maybe Gary Vee is onto something, telling us all the way till we're 30 to do anything.
Yes. Yeah. So with that, if you think about kids, they're very concrete. So the example I often think of is, let's say there's a little boy and his father was verbally abusive to him and said, "You good for nothing idiot, you'll never amount to anything." That little boy doesn't have higher reasoning. He doesn't have the ability to go, "Oh, my father's just having a bad day," or his father treated him poorly and he's taking it out on me. They just absorb it like a sponge, and it gets stored in implicit memory. It's memory that's stored in your body, but it's not connected to a narrative. Like, I could ask you, what's an annoying thing that happened to you yesterday? You could remember and pull it up and tell me. But a kid, those emotions just get stored. So then we go on in life and are just minding our business. We become professional, capable adults. And then suddenly something kind of triggers us, and then we go out of our window. And then in that, sometimes either for you yourself or the person you're engaging with, typically they're a fully capable adult, and then it suddenly feels like you're engaging with an 8-year-old or a 16-year-old, because literally what happens, your higher brain shuts down and you go into a fight or flight response, and you're seeing the present situation through the lens of when that, even if it's just minor trauma, first imprinted in your brain. So kind of back to the window, you can go out of your window in one of two directions. If you go at the top, you go into a state of hyperarousal, and that's more an anxiety type of sensation. So fast beating heart, something called catastrophic thinking, which is, if this happens, then this will happen, and then I won't get my funding, and then I'll lose my business, and then I'm a failure forever. It's like that 0 to 100. Sure you've never ever experienced?
No, never experienced that one. No, I'm kidding.
So hopefully someone watching will know what I'm talking about. But really, that hyperarousal, it's a fight or flight response. So if I'm walking down the street and someone threatening is walking behind me, I want my higher brain to shut down. It's not the time for me, if someone's chasing me, to go, I wonder what happened to them in their childhood. It's just run. Just run. Just exactly.
Go.
Run or hit them.
All right.
But that's the thing, is if you're actually in danger, you want your higher brain to shut down, because it's too complex. It's thorough and it takes its time. But if you're in danger, you just want to be in fight or flight. But a lot of times we're not actually in danger. We're in a really difficult situation with a client or with our spouse or loved one, and something gets triggered and we go out of our window. And that's not useful. So then the other direction is people can drop out the bottom and go into a state of hypoarousal. And that's more of a depressive type of stage. So that's, you just get totally shut off from your emotions. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. Whereas the top is fight or flight, the bottom is a freeze response. And people have different tendencies. So some people will always go up, some people always go down, or sometimes you go up and you're spin and you can't sustain that, then you drop out the bottom. Or for a lot of people, I see this in a lot of founders too, where at work their tendency is hyper,
Yep.
where they just spin, or I just got to respond to that email, or I just got to do this thing.
Yep.
And then they're just so exhausted that they come home and are just on lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for loved ones to understand.
That was the big one for me right there, was when you got to that portion. That was the portion that I was finally able to articulate to my wife, because for years, the thing that she says to me is, I know that when you're at work, you're happy and you're passionate and you're moving fast, and then you come home to us and you completely shut down.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a conversation. You don't want to interact. You just kind of like lay low. And I had never really figured out what was going on
Yeah.
there. It's exactly what you just described there. When I am working, I'm obsessive at work, right?
Yeah.
And I just can't turn it off, and I love working, and I go.
Yeah.
I think that 8 of my 12 hours of working per day is spent in the hyper zone. I really
Yeah.
do. And I think that by the time I get home, all that's left of me is to just dive into that hypo area and
Yep.
just try to regroup myself, because you do need that downtime
Yep.
before you go back into 8 hours of hyper, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like that, I don't know, some law of physics or something, but
Sure.
to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Right.
So to whatever extent, whatever area that we overextend ourselves,
Yeah.
eventually it's going to swing in the opposite.
Yeah. And I think that the most important thing out of this whole thing for me is to just be aware of
Yes.
when you're outside of your window, right?
Yeah.
I've always been very aware of my feelings, where I am, what's going on.
Yep.
I'm very aware of my strengths and my weaknesses, and when I need help and when I'm good. I'm very, very hyper aware of those sorts of things. But I've never made a conscious effort, until I heard you speak, of recognizing that, you know what, I'm not in the right mindset right
Yes.
now to make this decision. I'm about to make a very important decision, but I'm stressed out. I'm moving at
Yep.
Mach 10. And what I actually need to do is lay off the coffee a little bit, take 10 minutes, make a phone call to an advisor, come down a little bit, and then make that decision. And I think for me, that was really, really important for me to hear you say, and for
Yeah.
me to take out of that. And I mean, that was only after meeting with you or listening to you speak for whatever it was, 60 minutes, right?
Yeah.
I already got all the value I needed out of you in 60 minutes. No, I'm kidding. But it was absolutely incredible. So yeah. So anyone listening, if you want to know more about that, again, you're speaking on that topic
Yep,
on
I'll
the
be
10th?
sharing about that
I would-
more in depth, and how you actually get back in there. And
Getting back in the window is the important part, and we'll leave that as the cliffhanger. And everybody should come if you're in Minnesota, and if you're out of state and you're coming to Startup Week in Minnesota, swing by, hear Meredith speak again, 10 a.m. or on the 10th.
yep,
At-
10:10 at 10 a.m.
10. There you go. Yeah. So very much worth time. Okay. So, what are some of the most common, and again, we can't use names or people
Yep.
or individuals or any of that, and I don't want that. But what I do want to know is, what are some of the most common things? Let's stick with just founders, because I know that you
Yep.
work with founders and CEOs. Let's stick with just founders for right now. What are some of the most common challenges that you are working with founders on?
Sure. So the first one comes to mind. This is for founders, but I think this is broader. I think
Yeah.
for people that are high performing in general,
Sure.
in whatever application. And it might sound kind of funny at first, but it's actually, the issue is people struggling to be kind to themselves.
Okay.
So I want to explain this a little bit more. So actually, a lot of analogies I use are starting with parenting, because those actually, I think, flow into healthy leadership,
Right.
and then in how we parent or lead ourselves. So first, I'll start with this. So in healthy parenting, there's usually a combination of high warmth and high structure.
Right.
If you have a parent that's all warm and fuzzy and caring, but there's no expectations,
Yep.
it's not good for kids. If you have a parent that's all about expectation structure, but there's no warmth, it's also harmful for kids. And I think that's also true in leadership. So obviously in business, we're about bottom lines.
Right.
And expectations. But if there's also no warmth or care, people leave. People don't usually leave a job because of the work itself, but because how they emotionally feel,
Yeah.
whether they're conscious of that or not.
Okay.
So, and the other thing is, when people don't feel emotionally safe, they shut down inside, which means you can't access creative problem solving.
Right.
So that's just helpful information in general.
Mm-hmm.
But the next step for this is when you apply it to self-leadership, or the way that you care for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the people that I work with, they have no issue with having high expectations of themselves.
Yeah.
Not an issue.
Right.
But what they do struggle with is having warmth and kindness towards themselves.
Yep.
They're not able to actually treat themselves the way that they would treat other people.
Yeah.
So it's not about becoming soft on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not lowering your expectations. It's about having more self-compassion.
Yep.
And that's not just a fuzzy thing. It's actually neurologically. I talk about this more in that training, I believe, but as soon as you get frustrated with yourself for messing up again or not having this down already,
Yeah.
you actually take yourself out of the window and you're in a frozen state where you can't move forward.
Right.
So it's actually counterintuitive in a way that the picture I'm thinking of in my brain is if a little kid came up to me and yanked my hair,
Right.
my knee-jerk reaction would be to pull away.
Right.
But if I was to actually lean into it, I could maneuver myself out with less pain.
Right.
And it's kind of similar to that, rather than, because for a lot of founders, here's the thing, is you can get so far with cracking the whip on yourself. And that's actually how a lot of people get to where they're at.
Right.
Is they kind of punish themselves in a way, or I just got to work harder.
Right.
But the thing is, eventually you will hit a ceiling with that. And so a lot of what I work on with people is sometimes you can get so far with just your natural abilities or what you've learned to life in this point, but then you start to hit a ceiling where you don't actually have what you need to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And one of those common ceilings that I see actually is people's ability to not have self-compassion and to be kind and patient with themselves in the process.
Right.
And that's the thing, is it's counterintuitive, but the more kind and patient you become, the more quickly you can move forward.
Yeah. That's great, right? You see a lot of articles and people on social media talking about the importance of having great leaders, right? And how people don't quit jobs, they quit bad leaders, right? I've never, that I can remember, I can't remember reading an article about how you should practice that on yourself as well.
Yeah.
I never even thought of that until just now. I've just been in the process of making my first hires at my company, and I'm trying to determine the how we're setting the baseline right now of what it's going to be like to work here. What is the experience going to be here?
Yep.
I want to make sure that I'm giving people praise when praise is due. I want to make sure that everybody feels welcome and like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I haven't given a single thought to making sure that I'm telling myself the same thing, right? That's bad. I should probably do that because I've done some good things over the last couple years, right? I've had my head down, but I've done some really good things. I recently had a meeting. I flew out to Boston for Drift. Drift had a conference called Hypergrowth. It was great. And while I was out there, I had the fortune of sitting down with Dan Tyre from HubSpot, who has been somebody that I've called upon over the last 2 years for just advice, mentorship. Great person, and kind of he's kind of the grandfather of sales enablement, and smarketing is the word that he coined. That's his word. But regardless, I got to sit down with him for 45 minutes in a room without other people for the most part. It was great. And just bring him up to speed on what's been happening with everything. And going into that meeting, I can absolutely say I was in the hyper zone of my mind, right? I got to get all this out. I got to tell Dan all these updates that are happening and make him see all the good things. But he calmed me down and he looked me in the eye and he said, what you have done in the last 2 years since you first brought this to me is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I can't believe that a sole founder has raised the money that you have the kind of companies using your product that you do, that you're moving in the direction that you're going. And he looked at me and he goes, now you need to get those other things on your list done faster, right? Because he was asking me about the roadmap and what do we need to do. And I said, well, I think it's going to be 6 months. I think it's going to be 6 months. He said, I need you to do that in 2 months.
Okay.
I need you to do that in 2 months. That's what I came home with, right? I had to have that conversation with the team, but that was one of the first times, honestly, in the last 2 years that I've really sat back and been forced to reflect on all the things that have happened, because it has been moving so quickly, and there isn't time to think about the things that have been happening and celebrate those wins as much as you should. So I love that.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of the other thing that I see is because if you picture someone's at the top of their mountain of influence, and whether that's a big company or just your family, whatever your sphere is, what I see is because it's so lonely at the top, it's so key, I think, for leaders to have a place where they can be poured into because they're pouring out.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is because so much is future focused, it's really key at times to have a time to kind of step back. And actually, one of, I think, the things I say often in my trainings, it's kind of corny, but I think it's very good. And it's this quote that says, "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why it's called the present." So most of us either get stuck in the past or anxious. You look like you want.
No, I love that one. I remember that from when I heard you speak. I love that one. Yeah.
I'm actually going to say it one more time.
Yeah.
Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift. That's why it's called the present.
There you go.
So either we're typically stuck in the past or anxious about the future, and the gift is always in the present moment. So, and that's also how you connect with your window, how you connect to flow states and things like that. But actually, it's so key to actually pause and go, wow, there's a lot more ground for me to cover, but look where I've come. And actually take that time, and it's kind of part of parenting, reparenting yourself and giving yourself affirmation so that it's also just not externally based, so that you can shore that up within yourself.
I mean, so many good nuggets already, right? And I always try to keep the podcast to under 30 minutes, which can sometimes be challenging. And we could keep going for at least 30 minutes because I have so many questions for you. But I'm looking at the timer right now, and we're already at like 25 minutes, believe it or not. So here's what I want to do, though, is I want to dive back into your business because I'm sure that there are people listening. They might be, most of them are going to be local. I mean, that's where most of my audience is, but some of them might not be local. So my first quick question is, have you ever worked with a client that is not local to Minnesota?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me explain a little. The bulk of what I do, it's individual consulting, I call it, but it's basically a hybrid between counseling and executive coaching.
Okay.
So it's a place where you can process relational issues at home, drama with clients, overcoming anxiety, like a broad range. And I'll say what I've heard from clients is that it's meeting something that they don't have out there. Like, I'm obviously a big proponent of therapy, but often there's not time for that, or sometimes therapists don't always understand high performance or entrepreneurship. And then you have your business coaches or executive coaches, which again are fabulous, but a lot of times they're helping you these are your to-dos to move forward, but they don't always understand the internal things holding you back. And so to have that space to just quickly have those identified, and then how do we actually overcome those? But that being said, the bulk of what I do is local. So I meet with people in person, but I actually do a lot of international things. Some of my favorite clients are in Iceland right now. But so I do Zoom sessions or video sessions as well. So
awesome. So if anybody listening to this is interested in connecting with you, best place to do that is your website. Where do you? I mean, how do you want people to reach out?
So my website, scalingwithin.com. You can contact me there. LinkedIn, you can message me. I'm on Instagram, things like that. Scaling Within is the link. I'm actually this month starting to put out, I haven't for sure decided on the name, but something like a mini dose of inner growth. But basically, probably a few times a month, sending out like a very concise, bolded point list of recommendations, like books, podcasts, tools that help people in their inner growth journey. So
I think you should 1,000% be doing that. At the Drift conference I was just at, one of the things that they mentioned was the popularity of newsletters right now. Email is one of those things that people keep saying, email's dead, right? We got to find a different way, right? But as far as newsletters go, people are still digesting that. So I think that would be great if you were to start something like that. Sign me up, or I'll sign myself up. I suppose I have to opt in is the new rules, right? So I will opt into your newsletter. I would love to learn more about that. It's been great having you on. I'll make sure to put links in the podcast and in the vlog so that people can get right to your website if they want to reach out to you directly. Realizing that this is one of those things that, when people do reach out to you, it's not going to be in a public forum, right? And so
Yep.
most of your messages aren't going to come on LinkedIn where they're going to say, I just heard you and I really need to talk to you because I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? That's probably not going to happen, but they're going to send you direct messages. And I would encourage everybody to reach out because tremendous value in this person right here.
I just thought of one other thing.
Yeah,
Just I want to
do
say
it.
too is that the other thing I love doing aside from the one-on-one is the training with leadership teams
Yes.
and workshops. So
Yes.
whether it's a 60-minute lunch and learn and to share like the thing that you heard at Mini Bar.
Right.
And I love sharing about the window because of how much instant value it gives.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really fun to do for teams because then they have common language and understanding.
Right.
And then it also can be a half-day workshop where it's more in-depth and more personal application.
Right. So cliffhanger again. We got to figure out how to get back in that window, right? So reach out to Meredith. She'll help you find that window. It's great. Thank you so much for being on the Founders Mentality. And maybe we'll have to have you back on again in like 6 to 12 months or something. I mean, we're neighbors, right? So why not?
We could probably make it happen.
All right. Awesome. Thanks again. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.